In this bonus episode of the Ski Podcast, I talk with Helen Coffey, travel editor of The Independent and author of the book Zero Altitude, How I Learned to Fly Less and Travel More. We discuss her background in skiing, her time at the Telegraph Ski Snowboard Magazine, and her decision in 2020 to give up flying completely, a significant and possibly unique decision for a travel journalist. Let's have a listen to our chat. Great, I'm delighted to welcome Helen Coffey, travel editor of The Independent and author of Zero Altitude, for this bonus episode of the Ski Podcast. Hi Helen, how are you?
Hi, I'm great, thanks. Sun is shining after it was raining recently, which obviously we need the rain, but it's quite nice to see the sun again. So feeling perky.
Excellent. Now, you've been on the show before. Now, at the time, you had already made your flight-free pledge. But since then, you've published a book about your experiences. That is called Zero Altitude. The subtitle is How I Learned to Fly Less and Travel More. And I'm very interested in that. And we'll talk about that in due course. But one of the reasons our paths have crossed is that your background is in the ski industry. You previously worked at the Telegraph Ski and Snowboard Magazine before moving to The Independent, where you are now. I wondered if we could start off by finding out a little bit more about your ski background. When and where did you first start skiing?
So, I wish I could tell you where, but it's funny I've ended up working in travel because I have such a poor geographical memory for the places I've been. So I learnt to ski probably when I was about 15, 16. There was a school trip and I begged my mum, begged to go. And she said, all right. But, it's quite, even on a school trip, it's quite an expensive thing, isn't it? Because especially if you're new to it and you haven't gone with your parents as a kid, we had to have some lessons beforehand at the dry ski slope. Luckily, I grew up in Hemel Hempstead, so we did actually have a dry ski slope, which is now the snow centre.
Yeah,
real snow slope where you can go and learn. Back in day, it wasn't quite as fancy as it is now. We had to do that, and then obviously go and you're in your little ski school. And I don't think I was particularly good, but I remember it was in Italy. That's all I can give you. It was some kind of resort in Italy that was probably quite cheap. We drove the entire way there on a coach, obviously. Because I do it on two school trips, one of the times it broke down overnight and it felt like it took about 3 days. I'm sure it didn't, but it was a long time in the precursor to having like an iPad or a smartphone on a coach. We're talking cassette player or Discman to keep you occupied. So, but I do remember just loving everything about it, like the mountains, the scenery, the food, not the après in the way I would maybe enjoy it now at 16, but still that sort of off slope side of it as well. And I just knew it was something that I really wanted to continue. So I left it a few years, and then at uni we kind of organised a trip, me and my friends, of very varying abilities. I would put myself as like extremely amateur but very, very overconfident. So I would be attempting all these kind of runs that I really shouldn't have been on. But thankfully you're very bouncy at 20. You just kind of, you're down and then you're up again. I wouldn't ski that way now. But again, I just thought, oh my gosh, I love this so much. How could I do more of it? I don't have any money. So me and my friend decided to do a season after we'd finished university. So we both went over to Les Arcs together, and we were weekend reps. So we just worked the weekends. We skied the whole week. It was a really, really excellent way to kind of get the most out of a season and really, really, I'm not saying I ended that brilliant at skiing, but...
Really, lots of things you said there I found really interesting. Firstly, that you went on a school trip. So important. So many people I speak to, their first experience of skiing was going out on a school trip. And as you say, the costs can be quite significant, even when you're travelling out by coach. Really interested to hear that you learned at Hemel Hempstead, because earlier this week I interviewed Warren Smith for another special bonus episode that I'm going to release. And I don't know if you know, but Warren Smith is from Hemel Hempstead. He also learned at Hemel Dry Slope and ended up teaching there. And bizarrely, he also went on a school ski trip where the coach broke down on the way. Now, that would be quite weird if you were both on the same trip, or maybe it just says something about school operators of that time, that, this is a fairly typical part of it. However, I can definitely relate to what you're saying about the lack of, no mobile phones and streaming internet, etc. I went on a school trip where we had a VHS recorder with one screen that sat up at the top, at the front of the coach, and it played a movie by a comedy act from the 80s called Cannon and Ball, which are loosely described as comedy, and that was replayed again and again for the 24 hours or so that it took us. So kids, if you're listening today, coach travel has improved a lot since then, I reckon.
Yeah, totally. We had that VHS as well, but things had moved on because they definitely did change the movie. So I feel a bit superior to you now.
And you said you went out to do a season in Les Arcs. You were just working as a weekend rep. How did that work out then? I do know some of these jobs that most people typically would be thinking about, they go out, they work for a tour operator, let's say they're chalet staff or something like that. Were you just repping buses from the airport? Was that how that worked?
Yeah, pretty much. So big operators did it at the time. So we were working for what was Crystal Thompson First Choice. I think they're all bundled together. But because they had so many people coming in and out on those transfer days, it was worthwhile in some resorts having people that, would just hop on buses, get people to the airport, bring them back, sell them all their lift passes, their lessons, etc. on the coach. And that was pretty much you done. You'd have to go and drop off some lift passes the next day, which should have been an easy job. But at the beginning of the season, I remember you have no idea how shambolic it is when you start off a season in a new resort if no one's worked there before. You've got these I'm not sure if it's still the case now, but you'd have these people who are really quite young, sort of in management positions in resort, trying to figure out logistics of buying enough lift passes. It took at least a month before that process was really smooth. It was quite stressful, but it was a great way to do it because you didn't really get paid, but you got your accommodation and you got your ski hire for the season, and you got your lift pass. So it's sort of all you needed was money for food, and that was it.
That sounds like the perfect ski season. I did several ski seasons myself, and I know what you talk about selling the lift passes. It's definitely a skill in being able to get through a coach of people, being able to sell them ski hire, ski school, lift tickets between whichever airport you were at and arriving into a resort. If you're in Les Arcs, I'm thinking that you probably had you had a longer transfer. When I was doing some of the Three Valleys, you had a shorter transfer, you got less time to be able to do it, but it's still a challenge when you got a full coach. Particularly, I think I'm not 100% sure, but back in the day, you certainly didn't have the portable credit card machines. So I had these chunky things where you used to swipe the card back and forth if people wanted to pay by credit card. Do you have something like that?
Yeah, we still had those. Yeah, there was absolutely nothing electronic. There was just that the paper, whatever you call it, where you're making it in triplicate, and everything was written down. It's amazing, actually, to me now to think that. I assume it's moved on leaps and bounds since then.
Well, for sure, and I think one of the other differences, perhaps, between now and then, is that we used to require a photo from everyone for their lift ticket. So as they paid you, you'd write on the back of the photo their name and whether they were taking a 6-day pass or a Three Valleys pass or a Courchevel pass, etc. I'm guessing Paradisky and Les Arcs, etc. would apply. And, you're saying a bit how shambolic it was on the Sunday morning when you're getting your passes. You'd be at the lift pass office and you'd be going through and you'd have ordered a certain number. And at the end, you'd have one 6-day Courchevel pass left and one photo that on the back said, 7-day Three Valley pass, and right, okay, what's going on here? How are we going to solve this?
Oh God, it's bringing back memories.
But anyway, so you did a season in Les Arcs. It doesn't seem like a natural segue into journalism. How did that come about that you ended up, working at the Telegraph Ski Snowboard Magazine?
I think so. I wasn't a journalist at the time. I hadn't studied journalism. I'd studied drama, and had a sort of portfolio of different jobs after this season, trying to figure out what I'd like to do. But much of it was kind of working with kids in various ways, doing workshops. So some drama workshops, some career workshops. And I sort of enjoyed it, but it was a very, very tricky kind of career to manage, working for different people, different places at that age, not getting paid very much. And I just thought I need something where I feel like I can build a career. And I'd always really liked writing, even in my degree, the bit I really loved was script writing. And I thought, well, that seems like a bit of a monk's game as well for making money at the beginning. So what would be a way to make money from writing? Journalism. So I did a diploma at my NCTJ, which is how lots of people start get into journalism. And then my first job was an incredibly boring business magazine, which was for entrepreneurs. And I don't really know how I got the job because I knew nothing about business or entrepreneurialism. But I thought, okay, great, it's a first job. But I kind of thought, it would be really nice to write about something I was actually passionate about and interested in. And then just saw that the job at the Telegraph Ski Snowboard Magazine, at the time it wasn't owned by the Telegraph, and it got bought by them. And they were just advertising for like a junior sub-editor position, so very bottom of the pile. But I thought, I don't care what I'm doing. What I'd love to do is be writing around ski and snow sports, which is something I really, really like doing. And it was a great team to work with. And I learned so much about skiing, but also just about journalism and editing and writing, because it was such a high quality kind of production, and sort of worked my way up. So went to being a writer and then eventually the digital editor of the ski and snowboard site on the Telegraph travel section.
So you sound very modest about that, how you work your way up if you came in just at a kind of sub-editor at the bottom. But I'm guessing that you were there at a kind of period when we were seeing more of a transition from print to digital, because maybe that online editor position didn't really exist to start off with.
Yeah, it was an interesting time, as lots of publishers have now been going through the last 5 or more years, really, that kind of not just pivoting, but wholesale going, okay, this is the most important space in many ways. Obviously, there's still room for print, and print's still beautiful and important, but in terms of where the kind of revenue comes from, it's all online. So it was also really instrumental learning about that digital side of things, and things like, SEO and Google, and what you need to do to make something pop up when someone searches for, best ski resorts in France, so that yours is the article they see, because hopefully it's also a really good article. So you're not just trying to trick people, you're trying to get them really good content that you've created. So like a really, really interesting time to do it.
For sure. I mean, what you talk about there, SEO, and trying to, I'm not going to say game Google, but trying to get Google to work on your site is, a big part of what I do in my day-to-day job. And unfortunately, there was a time where you could game Google, but that doesn't really work anymore. Now, it does rely on, as you're saying, having good quality material. It obviously helps if you're at somewhere like the Telegraph or the Independent, where you have lots and lots of link equity within the website itself as well. But so you were at the Telegraph, you moved on. I had a quick look at your online CV and LinkedIn. Moved on to the Express for a bit, where you said you were posting 5 stories a day there. That's kind of pretty high output.
Yeah, we affectionately call it in the industry churnalism. Because you're just churning out stories. And I was only there for a few months, but again, I guess it's sort of a useful skill, is being able to turn things around really quickly. But for me, not losing quality or integrity, it's not easy to do. but I have a certain level of professional pride where I'm like, if my name's on it, it can't be absolute garbage because people can read it, and that's not okay. So yeah, I felt like that was another learning curve. I had a very, very different pace and dynamic to the Telegraph, as you could imagine, and then it was really, really different again when I joined the Independent. So it's been like quite a nice mix of things to get new skills and new experience.
Yeah, I think, while it might not sound like the best job, as you say, you learn from all of these different areas. The only thing I can come up with that might compare to that is early on in the podcast at the PyeongChang Olympics. Jim, my co-presenter, and I at the time, we decided we're going to do an episode every day during the PyeongChang Olympics. And as you say, when you're kind of, not quite sure how much it was journalism, I enjoyed what we were talking about, but it certainly gets you more efficient at performing the basic tasks when you're doing something so often like that. But so you arrived at your home now at the Independent, and you've built your way up to become a travel editor. The real reason I wanted to have you on the podcast just now is several years ago, I think it was in 2020, you made a commitment to go flight free. Now, I had my own sort of Damascene moment with my daughter in 2019, inspired by Greta. And I founded the lobby group Ski Flight Free, just trying to encourage more people to travel by alternatives to flying. But that's very different from the commitment that you've made. I haven't been able to cut out flying from my life completely. I think I'm right in saying that for the last 2.5 years, you haven't flown at all now.
Yeah, not since. I think my last flight was either October or November 2019. So nothing since then.
Well, I mean, that is, very impressive, but even more so given the fact that you work in travel, you are a travel editor. It's very inspiring. I mean, surely it must have been exceptionally difficult for you to be able to do that, or has it been relatively straightforward?
It's been a bit of both. Obviously, a very strange time to do it because I made my pledge in 2020. So basically, there's a campaign called Flight Free UK, which encourages you to sign up for 1 year at a time, saying I won't fly for the next year, because that feels a little bit less daunting and more manageable than saying I'll never fly again. So I sort of, with great, great ceremony, was like, I'm signing the 2020 pledge. And then COVID happens. So no one was really flying anywhere and no one was traveling anywhere. And so I guess in one sense you could say, oh, well, that made it easy. Which, I mean, I suppose it did in one sense. It was very frustrating though, because as countries sort of would open up and then close again, it was much easier if you could fly to take those opportunities and actually take advantage and go, right, we've taken France off. Well, this wasn't even red and amber green list yet. This was like travel corridors, if you remember that time.
Yeah.
So we had these places where if you came back, you wouldn't have to quarantine. And colleagues and friends of mine really jumped at those opportunities. And for me, it was a bit like, oh, well, can I get there by train? No. Okay. By the time I made the decision, they'd be off the travel corridors list and I'd have to quarantine for 2 weeks anyway. So it was challenging, and especially, with the different traffic light system lists. I remember there was a time when the green list just had absolutely no countries you could reach terrestrially. You could not reach any of them overland. And so it was really depressing because it was this like real excitement about finally. And then I thought, not for me though. You just have to.
I mean, when you made that decision, to go flight free, I wonder what your colleagues or, the editor at the time thought of that? Did they say, like, are you sure you want to do this?
No, they were really, really encouraging. I think I'm very lucky that I work somewhere where they'd already decided they wanted to do lots more climate coverage, and it coincided with them starting a new climate section, hiring new climate reporters. So there's a real push towards that anyway. So I kind of remember floating this idea, and the editor of the Independent at the time, there was never any question of like, you can't do that, you work on the travel team. It was all very like, this sounds great, you can write a column about it. And so that, it was a very kind of exciting idea and project. And it might have felt different, actually, had I had people in charge going, we don't like this, we're not happy about this. Obviously, we can't stop you, but we're not going to encourage it. That would have been a really, really different proposition.
Yeah, and you mentioned Anna Hughes before from Flight Free UK. Actually had her on the podcast before when we had an episode dedicated towards train travel. She obviously set up, Flight Free UK as a lobby group as well, and trying to get people to make this pledge. We haven't really, to me, and perhaps to you, it's kind of self-evident why you'd make a decision to try and cut a lot of carbon out of your life. But what tipped you to make the decision?
Well, it was, funnily enough, it was really an interview with Anna and several of her pledgees. So people had said they're going to stop flying for the climate. Because I was writing a feature about it, and there was lots of talk. Mid 2019, there was all sorts of stuff going on around the climate crisis, and one of those things was this idea in Sweden of flight shame, or flygskam. It's probably not how you pronounce it, but anyway, and about how loads of people in Sweden had decided to stop flying and had coined this term to sort of suggest that if you were getting on a flight, you should probably feel a bit bad about it at this stage. And it's not something you should feel braggy about and aspirational and posting your pictures on social media about you on the plane, as lots of us did. And so I thought, okay, well, that'll make a nice feature. But I didn't think anything about it. I was just like, oh, have we got some people in the UK who are doing similar? And then I don't know, it's funny how you get these kind of ideas or something plants a seed, because I interviewed all those people, was putting the feature together, and it just kind of hit me like, oh, I feel like I should probably do this. And I'd never thought about it before. I'd never even thought about cutting down flying before. So I don't know why it was this particular time and thing that changed my mind. But I think speaking to those people who were very passionate, but very sympathetic, they weren't, judgmental or kind of looking down on me because I fly all the time. They were just explaining very clearly, this is where we're at, this is why we need to change. And yeah, I just kept thinking about it, and the idea wouldn't go away. And I thought, I probably need to try this, because not just from an individual perspective, more of a like, yeah, as you say, if you're a travel editor doing it, it has a lot more kind of impact, a lot more influence, a lot more, you're able to normalize it on a much bigger platform. So yeah, that's kind of what sparked it.
It's a very similar period of time to when I decided to make more changes in my life to try and reduce our carbon footprint, see what I could do to influence within the ski industry that as well. I'm guessing at some point relatively early on, you decided, right, there's a lot of material here, I can convert this into a book, and the idea for Zero Altitude came together. Did that happen quickly, or did that happen after you'd started to take more and more journeys that didn't involve flying?
It happened quite quickly. So I had the idea that I wanted to do it, ran it past my bosses, etc. And then it almost came to be wholesale, as in, you should try and do this thing. Also, if you're going to do it, yeah, you should write a book. I hadn't written a book before, always wanted to, obviously, as most journalists will tell you. And I just thought this was the right idea. I thought, not just, it's very zeitgeisty or whatever, but equally, I didn't think enough had been written about what, really laying out what the actual damage is, what the alternatives are, whether it's as bad as we think, looking into things like carbon offsetting and future tech, and whether that's a good alternative or not. And I wanted to combine that, like lots of research, with actual like travel loggy kind of experiences. So, taking an interrail trip and taking ferries to places and exploring the UK and all these different things that you could try. So the idea is that it was going to be a combination of like, these are the facts, this is where we're at, this is what's important, but also not all doom and gloom. Here's some hope and inspiration for how you can still travel a lot and really enjoy yourself.
Yeah, I mean, I think that probably sums it up quite well. I mean, the book is covering lots of different areas. It's not like you mentioned flight shame or flig scam before. I'm very keen to impress upon people that I'm not trying to make anyone else feel ashamed about flying. That's something that you might feel yourself. Would much rather focus on the positive side of things. You talked about how people were being discouraged from bragging about their flights around the world. I personally feel shame about them. Maybe that's something that they can identify. You talked about people kind of maybe bragging on social media. There's another Swedish word that I came across, which I really liked. Again, pronunciation probably really bad, but I think it's Tagsyrt, which is bragging about train travel. I'd much rather focus on the positives there. And in the book itself, you're covering the stats, the reasoning as to why people should be cutting down their flying, but also like the benefits of it as well. One of the chapters is called At a Rail's Pace, and looking at the benefits of just traveling a bit more slowly. There is that element that people don't necessarily consider about train travel.
Yeah, definitely. I think we now expect everything so quickly, just in general in life. We're very unused to having to wait for things or be patient. And sometimes I think we forget what the benefits of that are, the joy of delayed gratification for something, as well as just the experience itself, in the getting there. And I know it sounds a bit sort of wishy-washy philosophical, but I really do believe that now, that there's something so magical about the journey being part of your trip and being excited about that part of it. I feel that way every time I get on a train or a boat, really. I never used to feel that way about getting on a plane. What I would feel excited about was the getting there. So you get on the plane, you're excited, but I mean, some people love planes and that's fine. But I think for most of us, we don't get on the plane like, oh my gosh, I've been looking forward to this plane journey for 6 months. We're just like, get me there now. And especially for lots of us, if what we're doing is short or medium haul on a little tin box of a plane that's got no legroom and no amenities and nothing nice to eat, it's just something to endure, isn't it? It's not something to enjoy. Which is not the same when you're doing slow travel. The traveling is really integral part of your holiday, and it's sometimes the best bit.
For sure. I mean, I'm obviously very biased, but I love traveling by train, but particularly, when you're going to the mountains, because some of the journeys that you take are just so beautiful, going alongside lakes and into the mountains themselves. Sometimes I haven't cut out flying completely like yourself. And so on those occasions when I do take flights, I have offset. Now I've done my own research on this, and I'm not going for offsetting schemes that involve planting forests, etc., something more direct. But I'm wondering what your view. You have got a chapter in the book about offsetting. What's your view about offsetting? Do you think it can actually work?
I'm going to try and give not a full answer because it's so complicated, which is why it's an entire chapter. I think it's the longest chapter as well. I've got mixed feelings about it. Lots of campaigners working in the environment space are just absolutely no. They no, offsetting's bad, don't do it. I think I have a more nuanced impression of it from speaking to people. I think there are lots of schemes that are good and do actually cover everything that needs to be covered, as in they are doing additional carbon savings, then not kind of exploiting Indigenous people. They're not double counting, they do what they say on the tin, and there are certification standards that are very rigorous in making sure that they do that. And I think this is the thing. I think with all sustainability stuff, we want people to reduce first. You reduce as much as you possibly can. And then the next stage is the stuff that you have to do. So the flights that you have to take, I think that's when you do offset. But never ever use the one that the airlines suggest to you, I would say, because I just don't think they're trustworthy. And because they don't have the transparency to know exactly what scheme you're paying into, and they're normally very cheap. So like Ryanair, for example, will say, do you want to add on £2 to offset? And I'm sorry, but £2 is not offsetting your flight. It's not doing anything really. So if you're going to do it properly with some kind of engagement, with some research, with a scheme that you feel confident is legitimate. And if you do that, it probably will be a bit pricier. It might cost you like 20, I think it's something like £20 a ton, something like that. It will not be cheap and easy.
For sure. I did my own research. I'll put a link in the show notes, but I ended up choosing an organisation called MyClimate that I come across when I was in Switzerland before. But hopefully, well, I'm pretty sure from the research that was is one of the better offsetting schemes. But yeah, you mentioned like sometimes, for people, there is really no alternative than to fly. What kind of structural changes do you think are required to help people to go flight free, to give people more options?
Well, I mean, I think we have to accept that in some cases that there's nothing that will really help. As in, if you've got family members who are in Australia, you're going to have to fly to see them unless you agree to never see them again. And I would never ask anyone to do that. So we'll leave that to one side. But in terms of our being so reliant on aviation, I think there are several things that need to change. One of which is that flying, well, it's already sort of happening actually. So we had such a long era of really, really cheap flights, which in many ways were great and, helped people see the world. And it seems like a really positive thing. But actually, they're too cheap. They did not at all reflect the impact that flights have on our planet. And the only reason they can get away with them being so cheap is because they get all kinds of loopholes. So things like, you might be aware that kerosene, which is aviation fuel that goes in the plane, does not get taxed. Every other kind of fuel gets taxed. But for some reason, plane fuel does not. So they're already got, a real advantage over other modes of transport. I mean, in the UK, we have APD, Air Passenger Duty, which was originally designed to be like a climate tax, but they didn't really ring fence that money. And as far as I'm aware, they've never really used it for anything particularly amazingly climate worthy. So it needs to be more expensive. And part of that needs to be things like probably a frequent flyer taxation. So it's not penalising the poorest people who don't fly very much. It's every time you take another flight, you get taxed progressively more, so that actually it's the people that fly most who are paying the most. And that way, I mean, the modelling that's been done by various kind of campaigners and research organisations suggests that the market kind of takes care of itself. So if something costs a lot of money, we don't do it so much. And that is better than telling people they can't fly or putting on a quota, you're only allowed so many flights a year. Because human beings absolutely hate being told what to do. We cannot stand it. There'd be revolts. Whereas if we just accept that we can't afford to do something so much, we're kind of okay with that. So I think that needs to change. And then on the other side of things, it would be great to see train travel cost less, or at least have better protections for passengers. So when you're traveling kind of across Europe, one of the problems is you're having to buy tickets from loads of different train operators. There's no way to buy a through ticket. And so if one of your trains gets cancelled and you miss the next one, you kind of got very, very little consumer protection then. You might have to buy a whole new ticket at full price. And that makes it very difficult to sell to people because they're obviously really anxious. Whereas if you're an air passenger on a through ticket, if one of your flights gets cancelled, it's not your responsibility. It's the airline's responsibility to get you where you need to go, to provide you often with accommodation or food in the meantime while you're waiting. You've got very strong protections. This is in the EU and UK specifically I'm talking about. But so I think there needs to be more of a parity with that.
I mean, you said loads of things I found really interesting there. I just managed to come up with the article which research showed that 1% of people cause half of global aviation emissions. It is about that frequent flyer side of things, and it must be possible to construct some kind of tax where maybe the first flight is free, but then after that there are additional costs to try and ensure that it's that kind of charge is spread fairly across people, and that could be a really good way of going about it. But in terms of train tickets, that's constantly frustrating. Like, I know I'm going to be traveling by train to the Alps this winter. I've already booked my Eurostar for 3 different Eurostars for the different dates I know that I want to go, and if I have to change them a little bit, then you get a small admin fee. But SNCF don't put their tickets on sale until 3 months beforehand. So I have to kind of wait. I can't do the whole thing in one go. I'm kind of ahead of the curve a little bit. I'm getting the lower prices on Eurostar. But why can't I just book everything in one go? Why do you have to wait, that long to be able to do it? Those sort of things are frustrating, and I don't mind going to individual websites to do that. But it would be much better if there was one website you could go to straight away. People know when their holiday is, when they want to go. They book their accommodation. They need to be able to book their train travel at the same time. And as we all know, whenever you have any kind of uncertainty, people like to eliminate uncertainty, so you can take that out of the equation. And it's unfortunate that there are objections that make it easier for people not to make those decisions. However, really good conversation. I think there's so many different things I could talk to you about, and I think, listener, if your interest has been piqued, you should definitely go to the book itself. I just wondered if you had, Helen, any kind of advice for anyone, basic advice for anyone who's looking to go flight free, make that switch, or just cut down the number of flights they take in general.
I think it's just that mindset thing I already mentioned. You have to start thinking of the journey as part of the trip, because lots of people say to me, oh, but I don't have enough, if you haven't got that much annual leave, it's not really fair to ask people, because they're still thinking of it in that sense of the journey just gets you there, and then you need as long in that place as possible. Whereas if you mix that up a bit, actually it's fine. And if you take advantage of, there are overnight trains and there are overnight ferries, and they can get you places quite quickly because you're using that dead time when you're asleep to travel. And it means often actually you can get to a place within a day or 24 hours that otherwise might seem quite daunting or lengthy. So you've got to be smart about it as well. But also just I think the important thing is to get yourself excited about the idea of traveling this way. So often my first tip is, if you haven't been to his website, go to seat61.com. It's a guy called Mark Smith, aka the man in Seat 61. And it's amazing. He's just kind of plotted every single journey you could possibly want to do, not flying, from the UK to literally anywhere you can think of. And it's really practical and helpful, because it tells you, you need to buy it from this website. This is how much it will cost. This is where you're going to stop for lunch. It has everything you would need. There's even pictures of this is what your cabin will look like, so you feel a bit more confident. And that kind of thing, for me, I love planning holidays. It's as fun as going often, that sort of build up where you're going, okay, and then I'm going to go from here to there, and I'm going to do this. And so I think visualizing it that way and really, really starting to get excited about your trip is one of the things that's helped me make that switch. I mean, that I don't actually miss flying because I've been too busy planning other more fun trips.
Yeah, it's a lot more interesting, thinking about, I don't know, maybe connecting trains somewhere, or working out the best way to get an overnight seat than trying to book your parking at Gatwick, for example.
Yeah, exactly.
Excellent. Well, thanks so much for all of that. I have one last question for you. Have you actually managed to go skiing yet since your pledge?
I have. Yes, I went last season, and I went back to Les Arcs, my home resort. Yeah, which incidentally is one of the easiest resorts, I would say, to get to by train, because it you can get the direct. There's a ski train. It will be running again this season, won't it?
It will be, and I've reported on that for the podcast before. So you went on the TravelSki direct train from St Pancras to Bourg-Saint-Maurice. I
did, and so you go all the way there, and then if you're going to another resort, you get a transfer up, which is fine. But if you're in Bourg, you literally get the funicular up the mountain, and you're in Les Arcs, which is just It's so easy. I would say it's so much easier than flying, because we used to get most people flying into Geneva, and then it was like, honestly, a 4-hour coach back to resort. I mean, it's not quicker or easier to fly in a lot of these cases.
Yeah, for sure. And what about, so you did that last winter, as I did as well. So you went out on the overnight journey and then came back on the direct one through the day. For this winter coming, they've actually switched that around. I don't know if you're aware of that. So decided, based on feedback from customers, are going to do the direct during the day and then the overnight one coming back, because I was very happy to be, one of the first people on the slopes on the Saturday morning. However, I was pretty knackered because I didn't get a very good night's sleep. How was your sleep overnight on the way out there?
Yeah, it wasn't great. I was a bit like you, and I hadn't been skiing for a while, so I was over the moon to just be there. But I did sort of have, like a child, I sort of crashed about halfway through the day. I was like, oh my gosh, no. So I think that's probably quite a good call. As fun as it was, you are in a seat. It's not like a sleeper train where you have a berth or a bed to sleep in. So you're, with the best will in the world, you're not going to get there refreshed. So I think that's a great shout.
Yeah, well, that's why they've changed it based on feedback. So, the slightly less comfortable journey back will now be, you'll be arriving back into London and you have all of Sunday to recover. And, I would point out as well that Les Arcs is a, brilliant place to travel to by train. I've often done it before as well, going with Eurostar, changing in Paris and going down there. And actually, Les Arcs is very focused on sustainability. And they have been offering the funicular that you refer to, going up from Bourg-Saint-Maurice to Les Arcs, is free to anyone who can prove that they've travelled by train to the resort as well. So that's a real advantage as well. Well, that's brilliant, Helen. Thanks so much for that. Your book, Zero Altitude, How I Learned to Fly Less and Travel More, is available, as they say, in all good bookstores. And I also say that anyone wanting to see you kind of in person can go to an online event that The Independent is organising coming up, hopefully just after I've sent this live. There's a virtual event for advice on your next holiday, which you're hosting with Simon Calder. So thank you and enjoy your travels, and look forward to following them online. Thanks very much, Helen.
Thanks for having me.